So you may or may not have heard, and the reason I say it that way is because when this happened last week and I started to see the tributes being paid to him, I thought to myself, yes, I've heard the name Hugh Segal over the years, born in Montreal, but most people, even when you follow politics, I think as an outsider here, probably don't recognize the name, but it turns out Hugh Segal was a very prominent and highly respected, I said prominent already, in Canadian politics. And we thought to get a better understanding of that, because I think we kind of owe that to people here to understand, we should talk to someone he worked with, former Chief of Staff. So former Prime Minister, the Honourable Brian Mulroney, is on the line. Mr. Mulroney, thanks so much for being here.
Good day, Aaron. How are you?
Good, thanks. First of all, let me ask you, how are you?
Well, as you may have heard, I'm not ready for the Olympics, Aaron. I've had a pretty rough time with a combination of cancer in the last 6 months and heart failure. So I got the double whammy, and it's flattened me quite a bit, but I'm trying to make a comeback, and I'm doing pretty well. In fact, I had my first session today with my trainer, and I'm starting to get a little strength. And
that's great news.
So it's been a rough period, but thank you for asking, and I'm doing much better. Thank you.
That's wonderful
Glad
news.
to hear that.
Absolutely. So, and when you said, I thought, wait a sec, the double whammy as you describe it, and the next thing, you're actually working with a trainer already, so I'm guessing you're feeling considerably better.
Yeah. Well, I just got out of the Heart Institute a couple of weeks ago after my surgery, and you know, the doctors are so good, and the medicine is so highly developed these days that even with an old timer like me, they can make me look a little better. So that's what I'm trying to do.
You sound good. You sound like yourself. So I imagine.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about Hugh Segal, someone you knew very, very well, and the fact that I mentioned, I don't know if you'd agree that most Canadians, you know, for someone who worked behind the scenes for so long, didn't necessarily know him.
Can you hear me, Aaron?
I can. Can you hear us?
Yes, fine. Okay. Look, I loved Hugh Segal. He was a poor Jewish kid from Montreal who made his way in the world in a quite fantastic way. He was probably, my relative contemporaries, he was probably, I guess, the most admired political person in Canada for many years. He was a progressive conservative. He was brought into the party by John Diefenbaker. He was a progressive conservative, but he was not a hyper partisan at all. You know, if you were liberal, NDP, whatever, as long as you loved Canada, Segal was on your side. Now, I thought, and I can tell you, I guess, that Hugh Segal had triangular interests. First, he loved his wife, Donna. Then he loved his daughter, Jackie. And he loved Canada. That was it. And he made an enormous contribution to our country, which is why when I was in difficulty, as I often was, I asked him to join me as Chief of Staff to the Prime Minister of Canada, where he served with high distinction and did a wonderful job.
I understand he also had a great sense of humor, Mr. Mulroney.
God, you know what? When Hugh passed, the first thought that came to me was that my view of him every morning, we used to meet at 8:30 in my parliamentary office, and to begin the day. And you know, even if the world was falling apart, or the party was being beaten up in some corner of Canada, Hugh always arrived with a big smile. I figured either he didn't read the papers, or he was just immune to reality. I loved him. He'd come in with a big smile on his face and have something happy to say about the country or about the party or even about me from time to time. No, he was wonderful. His sense of humor was absolutely delicious and really inspiring for a lot of people, because you see a lot of morose faces when you're trying to operate at a high level in Ottawa.
I bet.
You mentioned he was a progressive conservative, but not hyper-progressive conservative. And I wonder, the one thing in reading some of the tributes that have been paid to him in the past few days, people from across the political spectrum basically saying what you have just said now about what a great person he was, and how it didn't matter what your political stance was. He would work with anyone and everyone to get something done.
Absolutely. That's one of the, if you'll remember back, Aaron, 1990, 1991, 1992 were periods of great crisis in Canada, with free trade and the GST and Meech Lake and Charlottetown and all these things. They've all pretty well turned out to be very beneficial for Canada, as Hugh recently wrote. But in those days, everything was pretty well unknown and very challenging. And Hugh came in with his kind of infectious laughter and generous approach and thoughtful commentary on people. He brought them all together and made a lot of these things happen. Look, I can remember his contributions in our fight for Nelson Mandela, in Meech Lake, in free trade, in NAFTA, and he was for the little guy. I mean, he's the guy that promoted the idea of a minimum income for Canadians. He was almost alone out there promoting it. I supported him, but it was his idea. He was out there. He had it in pilot projects in various governments, but he couldn't get it done. But it'll be done someday, and it'll be due to Hugh Segal. So his personality and his approach and his love of Canada and his tolerance for people, even those who shot him down from time to time, made him a superb chief of staff and got us through some of the big things which today you look back on and you say, well, hell, why were people resisting the fight for Mandela? Why were people resisting NAFTA? I mean, not so long ago, he said, he's talking to me, and he said, Prime Minister, when I think of the fight we had for NAFTA, and what's NAFTA today? He said it was a bruising 24-hour-a-day battle, people fighting us every inch of the way. And what is it today? Well, it's a grouping of 3 countries with 500 million people, representing 7% of the world's population, which generates 28% of the world's wealth every year. What's wrong with that? So even towards the end, he saw humor in some of the old battles we had to fight.
As I hear you, we're both sitting here kind of like little kids listening to
Taking
someone bring us up to date on all these things. It's so wonderful to have you on the air.
I'm thinking anyone who didn't know Hugh Segal now wishes they did.
That's a great point.
Oh, you can bet your bottom dollar on that. He was a rare bird. He had a sense of occasion, but he had a sense of the little guy. He was always on the side of the little guy. And when the finance people, Michael Wilson and his colleagues, would walk in to see me and Hugh prior to the presentation of a budget or whatever, Hugh would simply say, at a given point in time, he would listen to everything, and they'd say, Prime Minister, may I get involved? I said, sure. And then he'd go at finance, the bureaucrats and the big guys, and he was talking about, how do we help ordinary Canadians? How do we help little people here? What about the guy who's got a hospital bill now because we haven't covered that part of it in healthcare? He had a sense of social justice, quite frankly, the likes of which I've rarely seen. He was a marvelous man, and I was honored to be in his company and to be his friend.
Mr. Mulroney, as I hear you describe what things were like back then, I can't help but ask what your take now is on Canadian politics. My question was going to be, do you, with your perspective, find it perhaps more divisive than it's ever been before or not?
Well, Aaron, we had a pretty rough time, I did anyway, with the rat pack that the Liberals put forward to savage me every day of the weekend. This was not a pleasant walk in the park every day. But what seems to have changed, and look, I'm not with it anymore. I don't understand a lot of this now. But the role of social media, which did not exist in our time, has now come to be a very strongly disruptive and sometimes extremely negative factor in our lives. And so it's very difficult for politicians these days who think that their opponents or their adversaries are across the House of Parliament realize that it's up there in the stratosphere with the social media. And I mean, I not often, believe me, but from time to time I have seen some of the comments. I can't believe how horrendous and horrible the commentary is in Canada. A country like Canada, for God's sake.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that maybe our colleagues today in the House of Commons and elsewhere have to deal with a larger burden than I had those years ago because of this new phenomenon called social media.
Okay.
I think you're so right, and I think it's hard to face who we've become. I'd love your perspective quickly on Pierre Poilievre having changed his image, yes, physically, but also, his tone, his message. Do you think that's effective?
Well, look, I don't know Pierre well. I've met him. I've watched him in the House of Commons. He's a highly effective debater.
Mm-hmm.
He's very good in the House of Commons, and he seems to have rallied the party around some fundamental tenets. He's clearly a talented young man with a lovely wife who's an immigrant who's very, very talented. So he's got a lot to offer Canadians. I feel that. So yes, I think that he's going the right way, obviously. But Canadians have to be offered a grand vision for the country. Canadians really think about the next election is always about the future, namely their future and the future of their children and grandchildren. So they want to be offered what I refer to from time to time as a grand vision for their country, for Canada, that they love so much. And that's when you have to set aside partisanship, and you have to try and summon your party and yourself to a higher objective and be able to articulate what you think is a proper vision for the future of Canada. I maybe shouldn't say this, but, in the Old Testament, there's a line that I love, where it says that young men have visions and old men dream dreams. Well, I've come to the view that Canadians want a combination of both. Mm. They want the visions and they want the great dreams. And if you can come close to articulating that on a major issue or a series of issues or an approach, then you may be home free. And if you haven't got that, you can find yourself pretty bereft when the crunch comes in an election campaign and you've got 51 days, or at least that was what it was in my time. You have 51 days to lead your party to victory, because for a leader of an opposition party, the options are simple. It's victory or oblivion. And so you better be ready with something that Canadians want. So I think that Poilievre is able to do that. But he better, because he's up against Justin Trudeau, who is, for whatever failings he may have, and I think he's been a fine young man. I've known him since he was 2 years old, for God's sake. But Justin Trudeau is one of the finest campaigners that this country has ever seen. So you better be careful before you put him down, because he's a tough one to fight.
Mr. Mulroney, it has been an absolute joy to have you on today. We very, very much appreciate it and wish you nothing but the best. I'm glad to hear we both are, that you're feeling better, that you're up a little bit and now actually getting back to where you want to be. I thank you so much for your time today. All the best to you. Well, thank you, Aaron. Always a pleasure to be on with you and at CJD. It's been a long time. My association with the station I used to be a director of standard broadcasting like 40 years ago, I guess, a long time ago. But I always loved the commentary and the people who were there and your comments on behalf of Montreal. And so you call me anytime if you'd like to get my opinion. I'd be happy to do it. And we will, and we very much appreciate that. Thank you so much. All the best to you, sir. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.